Alrighty, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for watching my webinar. My name is Carlo Alberto. I'm a culture head coach based in Italy. And during this webinar, I will briefly talk to you about the importance of politeness in international context, and namely why it is important during this culture project and also in the future life. And I will also touch about some points of why politeness can dramatically improve the quality of the interaction you may have with your teammates and also with potential future clients. But before getting to the nitty-gritty of this webinar, I will briefly outline which topics we're going to talk about during this webinar. Okay, firstly, we define what politeness is and what are the major definitions of politeness. Then we're going to talk why it's important and why you want to care about politeness when you're interacting with international business contexts. And then we're going to talk about the major theory regarding politeness, that is the theory proposed by Brown and Levinson. Then I'm going to give you some tips and tricks about being polite in international contexts. And then I'm going to have some question time. I'm going to leave my my email account. If you have any questions, please feel free to write me at any time. Okay. Now, before starting analyzing politeness, we must define what politeness is. But in the end, we all instinctively know what politeness is, don't we? Imagine, for example, you are at the dinner table in England. Politeness might include remembering to use please when you want something to be passed to you, or saying something nice about the food, and definitely not burping. In fact, all these particular things are somewhat more complex, even problematic than they first appear. For instance, complimenting the cook on the food after dinner may seem like a straightforwardly nice thing to do, but it's not as straightforward as you may think. Indeed, you may place the recipient of the compliment in a rather tricky position. For example, if they simply accept the compliment, they may sound rather immodest. But if they simply reject the compliment, they may offend you because you made the compliment. Consequently, responses to compliments tend to weave a path between these two opposite positions. Let me bring you an example. A response such as, it's kind of you to say that, suggests that the compliment is, at least in part, a product of the complimenter's kindness, and not necessarily a true reflection of the value of the food. So what you're doing here is basically splitting the value of the compliment between you that you are making the compliment and the receiver of the compliment. Finally, we talked about burping, but it cannot always be seen as the antithesis of politeness. Indeed, cultural considerations comes into play here. In some culture, for example, burping may be acceptable or even a sign of appreciation of the food, somehow a compliment. So that's why we say that culture has a great influence on politeness. What you believe in your culture to be polite may be unpolite or rude in other cultures. So the bottom line is that in order to deal with different culture, as you have to do greatly with this culture, is that you have to learn to see through others' eyes. Basically, put yourself in someone else's shoes and see how they look at the world to understand why they reacted in some way to something that you said. Okay, for example, two people may be looking at exactly the same facts, but they may assemble those facts into two completely different pictures of the situation. So different ways of doing things has nothing to do with which culture is more modern or more advanced. It's simply just a way of interpreting the world. These are some reasons, among many others, that forces us to follow what is called the politeness theory. But we still haven't answered the other big question: why is politeness important? The first and foremost reason we can think of is clearly that politeness puts other people at ease and helps build strong relationships. Furthermore, it helps decreasing the social distance between two people, making it easier to communicate one each other. Keep in mind that for the most of the time, you'll be dealing with people from other countries that they probably live in different time zones. So if you manage to reduce the distance between you and your hearer, that's going to be a great thing for you and for the communication in general. And in other cases, politeness may also help diffuse a tense situation and resolve conflicts. Conversely, impolite behavior tends to fuel the fire, tends to start fights, start arguments. So you definitely want to avoid that. But we still have to understand how to avoid that, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. So we must say that politeness is important because it's deeply intertwined, it's deeply rooted with the same definition of conflict and team management. Okay, so you can clearly see from yourself, and we just said that, how politeness is important in the context of its culture. Either you're talking with a teammate, a coach, or a director, being polite will help you greatly in living positive experiences and achieve your communicative goals. You can think about it this way. Its culture is an outstanding way for you to experience firsthand how you would react and how you would behave in business contexts. Also, how to deal with conflicts and how to get things done in group, not just individually. Because we all know how to get things done individually, but the main thing is here is learning to do that in group. Furthermore, you also have to consider two big variables that we already named, the different cultures and the different time zone. So please be aware that what you believe is polite may not be polite in some other cultures. Okay, now, we all know with some cultural variants what politeness is. But more importantly, we know when someone is being unpolite or rude. We know instinctively that. But how do we know this? We know this thanks to social norms. In a nutshell, there are two basic definitions of social norms. So, first things first, we must define what a social norm is. It's a set of rules of behaviors that any society has. But as we said, there are two main different types of social norms. The first one is the prescriptive social norms. Briefly stated, the prescriptive social norm view assumes that each society has a particular set of social norms consisting of more or less explicit rules that prescribe a certain behavior, a state of affairs, or a way of thinking in context. So basically, that is the guideline on how you would behave, on how you are expected to behave in a certain context. Any interaction then has two possible outcomes. You may have a positive evaluation or a negative evaluation. A positive evaluation, that is also called politeness, arises when an action respects the accepted social norms, while the negative evaluation, that is also called impoliteness or rudeness, arises when actions somehow violate the social norms. So in this sense, we can define politeness as the practical application of good manners or etiquette. But as we said, it's not always as straightforward as it may seem, understanding the underpinning rules of social norms. So on the other hand, we have descriptive or experimental social norms. Basically, they arise after repeated social interaction. They have their basis in an individual's experience of social situations. Repeated experiences of different social situations may lead one person to expect a certain kind of interactions to happen, and also may lead to be able to hypothesize what others' expectations are and also know how to meet such expectations. But still, we have to remember that etiquette books and parental instruction are simply not detailed enough to help us through the mass of social occasions we will tackle in our life. Therefore, we acquire politeness routines from our experiences of social interactions. So basically, the more we interact with other people, the more we find ourselves in different situations, the more politeness routines and markers we develop. But you may ask me, what are politeness routines? What are politeness markers? They're very simple. They're linguistics names for saying, for example, please. Please is the most used routine marker. And the more and more you find yourself in a different situation, the more and more you will understand how to use it and when to use it. The point about politeness routines or politeness markers is that knowledge of both their appropriate context and their positive social meaning has become conventionally associated with the word meaning. So what am I saying here? Basically, we believe that someone is being polite if he or she uses words that have positive meanings. But of course, we all know that this doesn't always mean that someone is being polite. Politeness always involves an overall contextual judgment. Okay, that was a little bit of a bombastic definition, but what did I want to tell you with those words? An example might help me here explain. Picture the following scene. You're working on your final report. You've been working on it for months. You've been spending a lot of hours researching, brainstorming, designing the document, and so on. And right a few days before submitting the final report, a teammate of yours comes up to you and tells you that you have made a lot of mistakes, that the design is not as good as they wanted. And so you start arguing. But still, you want to be polite. So, for example, in a rage of fury, you tell him, please, go to hell, please. Okay, if you just read the transcript of this interaction, you may lead to believe that such an interaction was polite, since you used the word please, that, as we said, is a politeness marker. But of course, we can all clearly see that it's not as polite as it may look like from the transcript. But why? We know it thanks to the context. We know that you and your colleague have been arguing for the past 10, 15 minutes. So that cannot be a polite interaction. Okay, so our please, and therefore our politeness marker, lends a note of sarcasm to the entire sentence. This is what linguists call mock politeness. And just a quick advice here, please avoid mock politeness. Please, if you want to say something hard to say or something not easy to hear, please just say it as honestly as possible, as straightforwardly as possible, because that's the best way to avoid resentment building between teammates. Okay, now let's go to the core of this webinar. The face-saving theory proposed by Brown and Levinson. Their theory consists of the following interrelated components. Oh, I'm sorry. As we just talked about this, watch out for mock politeness, because mock politeness is also called irony. And if you're in a context in which you're familiar, if you're with some friends and people you're familiar with, that's fine. But since you have interactions with people from all over the world, please try to avoid mock politeness, try to avoid irony, because you may never know if the receiver will understand irony and maybe will believe you're just being rude in a polite way. Okay, now, as we said, let's get to the theory by Brown and Levinson. It's called the face-saving view. Their theory basically consists of the following interrelated components: face and face-threatening acts, also called FTAs. I'm going to call them FTAs for short for the rest of the webinar, so you know what we're talking about. Okay, let me explain a second. What is a face? We can define face as the public image, a public self-image that every person wants to claim for himself, the emotional and social sense of self that every person has and expects everyone else to recognize. It is a basic human need. We all feel that. And feelings of self-esteem, worth, reputation, prestige, or autonomy all leads up to one's face. Okay, in simpler words, what is a face? It's the image of yourself that you're projecting onto society itself. Okay, it's what you want others to see you as. Now, face can also be divided in two main categories. We have the positive face and the negative face. Going with order. Positive face is the desire to receive appreciation for how you are being or how you're acting. It's the want of every member to be desirable to at least some extent to at least some other member of society. We know we cannot be likable to anyone in society, but we tend to have a minimum amount of people that likes us. This is what is called the positive face. It's the wish to be admired, liked, approved, or appreciated. Okay, so we can wrap it up as the desire of receiving appreciation from others from the way you act and behave. This is the positive face. Now, going to the second definition, we have negative face. That, in short, is the will to be free to act or choose. Basically, is the want of every competent adult member of a society that his or her actions are unimpeded by others. It's the wish for freedom of action or from impositions. Basically, the claim to be able to do whatever you believe is the best whenever you want to do it. So, as we said, it's the desire to be free to make your own choices. Okay, now that we have defined what face is, we can go to the second part, that are the FTAs. because we must understand that in various interactive situations, that is in any speech or text or emails or whatever, much of the normal social behavior has the potential to cause damage to either both the speakers or the hearer's face. Also, may damage either the positive or the negative face. We call this interaction FTAs, or face-threatening acts. As you can see here, we can believe every human to have two images of themselves. One wants just to be liked from others, and the other one just wants to be free to make his own choices. Okay, now let's talk about a little bit about FTAs. Oh, I'm sorry. The negative phase is threatened when an individual does not avoid or intend to avoid the obstruction of their interlocutor's freedom of action. So let me bring you an example. Freedom of choice and action are impeded when the negative phase is threatened. For example, if you say to a teammate of yours, "Please give me that book," you may like to believe that you're being polite, but actually you are not. You're threatening his negative phase, because think about it, you're just giving him or her two options. Either he agrees with you and gives you the book, and therefore basically gives up his free will, because he maybe would like to say, "No, I cannot," but if he wants to be polite, he has to pass you that book. Or the other option is just saying, "No, go get it yourself." But in this way, he's being polite. Basically, you're leaving him in the corner. He doesn't have any options. That's a negative. That's a threatening face-threatening act to the negative phase. On the other hand, for example, if you go to a friend of yours and tell him, "Oh, I see you sad. Probably that's because your girlfriend left you, aren't you?" You basically are threatening the positive phase of your friend. You may ask me, why? I'm just caring about my friend. Yes, you are, but you're not keeping in consideration that maybe your friend doesn't want to be exposed that much, because you're basically are attacking his image, his social image, because it's not always great to be left by a girl or a boy. So by saying something like this, you're actually underpinning his ability to say, "No, it was a consensual breakup," maybe. Okay. Now that we have all this clear, of course, just a little bit of disclaimer here. This is the face-saving view by Brown and Levison. Is not the only theory about politeness, but is nonetheless the more accepted one in linguistics. There are other theories, there are more modern approaches, but still the main accepted theory is this one. So please be aware of the fact that when you're interacting with someone, you may be threatening either its positive or negative phase. Okay. Now, let's talk about some tips on how to be polite in international context, because keep in mind that you cannot know what is polite and what is not polite in any culture. It's I'm not saying impossible, but it's very hard. You have to spend a lot of time researching and studying. So you must rely on some sort of politeness routines that may help you in avoiding contrast and avoiding rudeness in international contexts. The first things, as we said before, always offer alternative solutions. Basically, always create win-win situations. Although what it may look like from TV shows or movies or whatever, or maybe a web series, negotiations in international contexts are always harder than what they look like, because there's almost never is a winner and a loser. Anyone in the negotiation is to some extent a winner and to some extent a loser. So when you're interacting with your teammates, you want to make sure that you create win-win situations. So basically, you want to give them the chance, the freedom to choose whatever they want. Let me bring an example to clarify here. For instance, let's bring again the utterance, the example from before. Instead of saying, "Please pass me that book," you might say something like, this is just a suggestion, of course. "Please, if you have time, could you please pass me that book?" It's a little bit more complex. It's a little bit longer as a sentence, but gives your hearer the option to be polite and also to refuse your request. Because you may say yes, you may say no, but it may also say, oh, I'm so sorry, I have a lot of work, I cannot really leave my desk now, but I'm so sorry. Okay, in this way, any one of you as being polite, but still you're not threatening the positive and the negative face of the hearer. Okay, so basically don't force anyone to do what you want or being polite. Give them a third or a fourth option. This is the first tip, because this is a universal. Faces are a universal concept. Okay, so despite the culture, regardless of the culture of provenience, any person will understand what you're doing. So this is a nice international tip. Let's go to the second one. As we said, you cannot know all social norms. Try to be honest and open-minded. For example, if you're dealing with someone that lives in a country that you don't know particularly well, or you're not familiar with his culture, please don't be afraid to ask. Because this culture project, is also about growing personally, not just from a professional standpoint. But if you have the possibility to meet very different people from very different countries. So if you have any doubt about what is polite and what is not polite, go ask, because it's easier to learn this way. For example, I found myself in a situation when with my firm, when we had to deal with a Japanese client. We proposed our offer, and right after the offer, our Japanese clients remained silent. And we saw it as a lack of trust, as they were pondering how to say no. But after a while, I asked to a professional international negotiations, and he told me, no, actually, in the Japanese culture, being silent is a sort of compliment, because it means that you're taking your time to evaluate the proposal, and therefore, the proposal is a good proposal. And it's easier for me remembering that, since I lived it in first person, firsthand, instead of having just read it on a book. So whenever you have questions or doubts or whatever, go ask your teammates. It's the best way to grow personally and also work together harmoniously in the team. Okay, so the third tip is try to be polite in every interaction. It's better. What do I mean? That may sound a little bit too general, but basically keep this in mind. During this culture project, you have to balance between the unharmonious work in the group and also the final outcome. So you don't want to do all the work on your own, neither you want to just spend time chitty-chatting with your teammates. You have to find the balance. And if you manage to find a way to be polite directly in any interaction, you will save a lot of time, because picture this: if you have an interaction with a teammate and you argue, you will have to lose time later, and I'm using quotes here, air quotes. You have to lose time to adjust the situation later. Okay, so if you're being polite in the first place, you may just use that time for brainstorming more, or maybe designing more the document, or maybe find out new sources. So it may save you time and also will help you build a strong team management skills that will help you in your future. So again, the next step is learn to see through others' eyes. And again, if you don't know something, ask. It's always, if you ask someone about this culture, you're actually creating a bond, a connection between you and him or her, of course. It means that you are caring about the other person, and you're not just there to get the job done, but you also care about the other people. The other person. You're caring about what they know, what they are used to. So this is an excellent way to grow you and also make other people grow by explaining why you believe something is not okay, or why you believe something should be done in a different way. So please don't be afraid to ask and to explain. Be as straightforward and honest as possible. And the last tip or advice that I want to give you is be ready to restore politeness. Saying sorry is okay. If you understand, or if someone tells you that you have been unpolite, you have been rude to someone, and maybe you didn't notice it. I'm not saying that you did it on purpose, but maybe you just said something wrong that you didn't know was wrong, because again, you cannot know the social norms of each culture. So if you get to this point, please don't be afraid of taking a step back, look at what you said, and approach your teammate and tell him or her, "I'm sorry, I didn't know that would have hurt you. Could you please explain me why, so I won't make that mistake again?" In this way, you will show either that you're a good team member and also that you're able to create boundaries and connection with other people. Okay, so these are my tips, and basically the webinar is over now. I mean that. Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing. This is a introductory webinar. Of course, it is just a really brief introduction on politeness. And if you want to know more about politeness, or if you want to expand your knowledge in this area, in the last slide, I prepared a short reading list that are the books that I believe that are regarded as most interesting in this context, and that might help you a lot in developing your knowledge about politeness and how to be polite in different situation and context. So let me bring it up, the reading list. Okay, here we are. So the first book is pretty famous. It's from Geert of Sede, that is the one of the most prominent sociologists in nowadays world. Basically, his work pivoted on the study of different cultures and how cultures impact the different organizations. It's called Cultures and Organizations, Software of the Mind. I warmly advise you to get the last edition that was edited in 2010 and is the third edition, because it also has some appendix in the end of the book that may help you understanding more the book, because it's a pretty complex book, but really worth reading it. And then we have Politeness, Some Universals in Language Usage by Levinson and Brown, that are the two scientists on which the most of politeness work and studies based on. Then I actually enjoyed a lot reading Working with Spoken Discourse by Deborah Cameron. It's a really interesting book. It's a little bit, past me is the definition, a little bit easier than the two before. It's a little bit less academic and more plain in the language and also in the way it's exposed. And then we have the Handbook of Social Linguistics. You don't have to read it all. If you go through the index, you will find some chapters that will definitely talk about politeness. And so basically these 4 books may be a good start if you want to develop and further expand your knowledge in politeness and negotiations. So thank you so much for having watched my webinar, and please feel free to contact me at any time if you have any questions or you just want to talk about politeness.